All right, so welcome back to the weekly forecast contest discussion. We'll start by going over the uh, recent verification. So, looking at the CRPS, our best human forecaster was Matt Lanza, and our best forecast overall was the 5-year moving average, followed very closely by the EC and Industry One. Um, Looks like our verification was 58.1 for this week, which the euro actually nailed perfectly. Um, which I don't know how many times that's happened before, but I don't think it'll happen again for a while. Um, Looks like most of us were on the correct side of the 30-year. Um, but if you weren't, you kind of got hit pretty hard. So an unfortunate part of CRPS scoring with that. Looking at the temperature departures, it looks like we had a flip from what we've been seeing for the majority of the summer. So instead of warm west, cool south, and kind of whatever random weather is happening in the north, we had a warm north, a warm-ish, I'll say, south. I mean, it's not too warm in places like Texas, and Georgia wasn't too warm either, and but Louisiana looked pretty warm, and other parts of Texas were warm. But Chicago was also quite warm. New York, Philly, Baltimore, even Boston was quite warm for this one. And then we had a quite cool west, surprisingly so, considering that the majority of the time we've been uh, warm for most of the most of the summer over there. So taking a look now
Hey,
at
Michael.
yeah.
Yeah, can you look at that map in standard deviations? The reason I'm saying that is like +4 in Orlando is got to be way higher standard deviation than like +6 in Chicago.
Let me see. I'm not sure how to do that off the top of my head. Let me see.
Okay,
Uh,
I mean I wouldn't like necessarily like don't belabor the point, but it might be helpful to have the ability to kind of look at this in sigmas, only because it's a little misleading. Like the anomalies in the south don't look that impressive, but on a standard deviation basis, they may be. South coastal Texas, Florida, lower Mississippi Valley, Carolinas, right? Like a +3 or 4 in Raleigh, North Carolina is, way more valuable than like a +5 in Boston, for example. That's all I'm saying.
yeah. Doesn't
Is there,
look.
so I see a drop down in the lower right under the map. It says departures. Is that, oh, never mind.
Yeah.
I guess Minnesota doesn't have that functionality on this side, on the
It
Dynac.
doesn't appear to. Dave, do you know if there's anywhere I can get sigma values for these?
Not offhand, but that I think Dave does bring up a good point about that. Yeah, it'd be interesting if you can.
Yeah, I don't think there's yeah, I don't think there's any way I can get the sigma values, so
Dave, have you ever seen that on the site?
On this site, no. Dynacast, I have not.
It's a great idea, though. It's like, I mean, it totally does make sense because, yeah, we definitely know like that, like the equivalent temperature, like one standard deviation anomaly, or one standard, deviation in terms of anomalies, it's going to be much different, say, in Chicago than it is going to be in, say, Key West, all things being equal, right? I mean, it's just the variation is going to be so much greater in the winter and probably in the summer too, just all year round. And it would be interesting to see what that is. Yeah.
well, since I don't have that, I'll just have to oops, I think this is wrong. Let's try this one instead. Yeah, it looks a little better. And then for some reason, double. Okay. I guess they fixed the double ocean masking problem. So looking at the 500 millibar height departures, looks like we can see the flip here as well. Nice big trough in the west, nice ridge in the east. Let's see if the Euro was able to capture that. I don't know if I like that map. Maybe this one will be a little better. It loads. Yeah, okay, that one looks a little better. So looking at, let me pull these up next to each other. So looking at these, I would say the Euro did reasonably well with the placement of the high in the east. It captured that, I think, reasonably well. Maybe it could have been a little further to the northeast, but that's kind of nitpicky. Looks like it missed a little bit with the placement of this high pressure system. Wasn't really in forget what they call this area between Alaska and Russia. I can't remember. I know there's a name for it, but I can't remember it now for some reason. It was more in the Gulf of Alaska area rather than the Aleutians, I think is what it's called. So my guess, since it missed the low pressure in the west coast, my guess would be that moving this high pressure system a little bit closer to the coast had a downstream effect of there being low pressure in this area. Anyone have any thoughts about that? Or maybe they know some secret about the Euro and low pressure in the West Coast?
I don't off the top of my head.
No, I don't either.
Okay, well, we'll assume that that's correct. Let's see if the CFS, our worst non-human performer, was able to capture that. I get the feeling that it, no, it didn't. So it looks, oddly enough, this looks pretty close to what happened minus the trough in the West Coast. Just put this over here. That's the Euro. So it seems to have been able to capture both of the high pressure systems off the West Coast, and it's a little too far east with the one off the East Coast, but it's still there. So once again, the CFS did reasonably well, at least over North America, with the pattern. I don't know necessarily how it did. I could check elsewhere, but if no one wants to see what it looked like globally, I won't bother with it. But interesting that both models missed any kind of troughing in North America, other than up in the Arctic Circle, basically. So that's interesting. Anyone have any thoughts or comments about the models? Okay. If anybody thinks of anything, just shout and I'll give you the floor. Looking at the rest of the verifications here, the scores. Let's see.
Hey, Michael, can you, under my name, can you click read more? I don't know if I made a comment on there.
It doesn't look like it.
No,
This week.
there's one of the weeks in here. I don't know if it was this week or the week after where I was making a comment about the tropics being active. It's not important right now, like what week I did it, but this idea that, mid-April was going to be a much more active tropical window, has kind of come to bear, right, a little later than perhaps expectations by a week or so. But this is, I think, what we're seeing now is kind of direct impacts to like Atlantic, nearby Atlantic tropical activity. And kind of the macroish pattern, which we've kind of seen. This is the breakdown of that macroish pattern, right? Like, it's kind of some of the struggles we've talked about in the last like 3, 4, 6 weeks even, which was like we came out of this cool July and persistence felt like the right call, and persistence was just killing it. And I kept saying, like, even in the persistence, there's these hiccups of heat, and you're getting these 3, 4, 5 day spikes. And if you can kind of, you still have to be able to predict those in this pattern. Right? That's the challenge, is that kind of just kind of like waltzing through a persistent pattern does not without its landmines, right? And there was, and now there's even more so with regards to how active the tropics has been. So I think what you saw at 500 millibars in this week verification is this true, that is a, to me, just looking at North America, that is a classic like West Atlantic tropical activity signature. And that's kind of borne out. And I'm not saying there isn't other macro-ish factors, right? That the Pacific to me is starting to look more La Nina-ish than we've seen all summer. There's a component to that as well, right? That big North Pacific ridge should become kind of a more dominant feature as we roll these weeks into fall, and maybe we're starting to see some fingerprints of that. But the North America pattern to me looks very tropical. Dave, you have any comments on that? You've kind of seen these patterns time and again. I mean, is it your view, or do you have a different take? Or go on.
Sorry, I was on mute. I don't know. I mean, I guess I look at the short answer is I don't think I have any particular like insight in terms of that point in particular. The thing, but I guess the thing that I guess grabbed my attention a little bit is that overall, when I look at those global models in terms of what verified versus what was predicted, Michael, do you still have that up, like the EC or yeah, either one, the EC or CFS global map? It doesn't really matter. Yeah, like I don't think the models, like, I think they captured the broad picture, right? I mean, obviously it was a lot more intense, right? It was ridge trough, if you want, like East Pack, and then big trough in the west. Yeah, exactly. And then ridge in the east. But they, this is not like a situation where it was like a 180, right? Like even the CFS, which I know scored poorly in terms of CDDs, but yeah, that's a CFS too, right? In the EC. It captured the broad idea, right? Like, and I know some meteorologists have a rule of thumb where they say, all right, it's got the pattern now. Like, I believe the pattern, but it's missing the intensity. And if you went with that sort of approach in this forecast, you would have done really well, right? You would have said, okay, it's deeper trough in the west and bigger ridge in the east. So I guess that was my particular takeaway from this forecast, was that I actually thought, I think the global models from a jet stream perspective did reasonably well. And I think this is another case where, there were obviously important differences in terms of CDDs between the CFS and the EC, but I think this is that classic bias correction, which we've talked about ad nauseum here, where, if you just applied a bias correction to the East CFS, you probably would have got a similar kind of forecast to the East, I'm guessing, EC, and you would have been pretty close. So that's all I had in terms of thoughts.
Well, go back to that map though, Michael, for a minute. If you look at the Euro, I think you look at the Euro 3. Like, here's the funny thing about that pattern though, right? I agree, Dave, with what you said, which is like the ridge over the Eastern Canada and the Northeast US, seem to have the right placement. But if you'd go with that and seasonality, you'd have actually probably forecasted cooler than normal temperatures from, say, like the Carolinas west, particularly knowing how wet it's been in the South and Texas this summer. And clearly it wasn't like that, right? Like the verification ended up being much hotter than that map might have implied. And that was my point with, I think that was the influence of the tropics.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that in this particular week, the adding a bias correction to the CFS would have helped the score. It wouldn't have been minus 200, but it wouldn't have gotten anywhere near the verification of 58.1, at least for this particular week. So the CFS was extra cold today.
I want to make a point about the verification too, which is if you look at David's Margolin's 52.9, And then you look at mine, I made mine after his. I went 53.0. I just want to point out that I beat him by 0.1.
Yeah.
But this is an old rule of thumb in forecasting methodology, which is that if you are just 0.1 better consistently, you just really, really beat the crap out of him by the end of the season.
Well,
Kind
Matt,
of pricey.
Matt Rogers isn't on the line right now, so it's unfair. But like, at least I beat Matt.
Here you go.
Yeah. So I think Matt wants to. I think we all would like. Well, some of us, not maybe Professor Decker and not maybe Michael, but would love to have this summer over again. But I think Matt more than anyone. I was looking at the directional hit rate. Can you pull up the directional hit rates? Yeah, you could do the full one. Yeah, the bottom one, which has like everything, and yeah, do a sort on this. Matt, it's a good thing I'm not a client of Matt's right now. Otherwise, he might fire me for this.
38.
But, yeah.
I'm only 50 though, Dave. I'm only 50.
I know. Look at me. I'm like, well, I guess I've moved up a little bit here in the last couple of days, but I was below the Mendoza line too, not too long ago. So, you know, what's amazing to me too. Like, I don't know. I don't want to say amazing. That's a very strong word. But this is one of those things. So I would love a little bit more time to dig into some of this stuff. I don't know if I will, but like the trend, like, so the trend is 71%. Now, maybe that's, I don't know, maybe that's just whatever. It's just some dumb thing about it. But it's just, it's interesting to me, like, some of these this summer and how it's verified. And, like we've talked about ad nauseum here, the variability, the swings, which just seem much less predictable than some other previous years. It would be really interesting to study this more in terms of, the pattern changes and what drove all these cool and hot periods during the course of the summer. But Michael and Professor Decker are, depending on what metric you look at. Yeah, there you go. So Michael's there at 69% with the directional correctness. Who's next? What human forecaster is next? Directional correctness. You
Probably you, Dave.
Oh my God, you have to go wait. And oh, there's Professor Decker. Yeah, and Philip. Yeah. Yeah, Dave, you're okay. You're right at the 50. Oh, Dave. And so these next couple of forecasts are important, Dave.
They are.
How you finish the summer, because we only have
critical.
Yeah. You gotta finish about 50%.
I'll try.
This is kind of surprising to me, honestly. Dr. Lupo, like, you can tell by the score, to have under a 50% directional hit rate doesn't seem right.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to say the summer, because you're right. There was a period there where Professor Lupo was smoking. I mean, he was smoking, especially during that period where, we saw some of the cooler, patterns and periods or whatever. And he really nailed that. But I guess, without having looked at this week to week to week to week, that maybe some of the other, hotter periods like Dave's talked about, which have definitely snuck in there.
We're going to have here's the thing. We're going to have a hotter August than July nationally. Right. And really nobody saw that coming, honestly. I mean, back in like mid-July when it felt perpetually cold and all the heat was going to jammed out in the West. Nobody saw a hotter August, but here we are, right? This is the challenges of like a full season of forecasting. And I'm not going to try to defend my numbers. They just are what they are, but I've been kind of perpetually on the warm side. So I had to take some lumps during that July period, but I like some of it is you miss like timing, right? We talked about this. I think we talked about this kind of forever, right? But the timing of these things are challenging as well.
Yeah.
So it's going to be a summer that verifies, at or hotter than the 10-year and way hotter than the 30-year. So I don't know. I mean, it's like, I guess that gets into some of the sentimentality, right? And I have to contend with that, right? Like, there's this whole sentiment view of the marketplace that I work with kind of day in and day out, which is kind of what is the temperament of the season, right? This is going to be seen as a reasonably hot summer, despite what was some really cool weeks in July. So
yeah, you read my mind, Michael. What are we targeting here for the June-August period? So we're targeting, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The 6th warmest or 6th hottest. since 1950. So with all, Dave and I, we've said this several times this summer. So with all the talk of, oh, these cool periods and
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah,
I mean,
six hottest since 1950.
I go back to this view. If we ever actually have if we ever have a summer that's on the 30 year, we're gonna we freeze to death.
Yeah.
You'll never use a pool north of like the state of Virginia. Like it would just be so cold.
It's crazy how high the bar is. Yeah, it's crazy.
Right. This maybe this view in from a like a lay person's perspective, it wasn't really a hot summer. But right, here we are. Like we're cranking these last 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks of August, we'll crank to get that number.
And this shows you why the trend has done well. Like even, yes, there have been some weeks where the trend was obviously a bad forecast, but you can say overall, look at the trend. Like again, if you're forecasting a top 5, top 10, week on week, you're, at the end of the day, you're probably going to be in the ballpark based on what's going on. What's this now you're looking at?
This is just July, which was the only month near the 30 year. If you add in June and August, it of course pops to number 6 all of the last 70 years.
Where does it compare to last? Like bring that up again, the summer to date or summer of
Summer to date, June.
I just want to see where last year fell in comparison to this year. It was a little slightly hotter, but not much.
Let's see, 2020.
Oh, a decent
little
amount hotter. Yep.
Yeah.
This year's cooler, but by a decent amount actually. But yeah, again, Dave, it goes back to what you're saying.
Look at this. Can we do a little math here? It's like, when was the last time you didn't have a top 10 warmest summer at the time? At the time when it was, at that year, not including future years. Can you go up a little bit? Michael, yeah. So obviously 11, 20, 10, 18, 12, 19, 2005 would have been.
2017 might have been the more recent one. If you can.
Yeah, it does look like 2017 is way down there at 18th position. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, right. So, okay, so there's one. There's one there. But
yep.
Yeah, I bet you there's not too many like in the last 10, 15 years,
It's like 2013.
13 would have been as well. Yeah,
Yep.
that probably was
13.
It was wedged in as a cool summer and a really warm period. And obviously, these are all warm periods. But.
Maybe what 2004? Oh yeah, 2014. Okay, there goes my back of the envelope thing wasn't. So there have been some exceptions for sure. That if you're going.
But imagine if we had a 2004 type summer where it's 65 out of 71 on the cool side.
Oh my God. Or even a 2009, which I think is probably a little bit higher up, but is still one of the cooler summers in the last, 20 years.
I was struck by, I don't know if you can bring up the map again of the summer distribution of where it's been warm and cold. I was struck by how similar it is to the broken record CPC forecasts. But it looks pretty much dead on with the CPC forecast that we had week after week after week. However, as Davis pointed out, you might have predicted this pattern for the summer, but in any given 5, all sorts of different things are going on. I just point out the challenge of even if you knew the summer as a whole would look like this, any particular week, all sorts of variations were going on within that pattern.
Right. Right, and that I think that's obviously it's a deeper dive, but like it's more of an attribution in terms of predicting pattern shifts, which has always been the holy grail, I think, of like energy forecasting, or at least commodities in our business. It's like if you can catch the big pattern shift, right? Then and those are, I think, the hardest things to do.
Yeah, and even to Dr. Decker's point about the CPC, it looks like even they were, not to take anything away from them, they were pretty spot on with this. But there were a few, at least in this map, there's a couple of misses that wound up, making the forecast overall a little bit warmer than what the CPC was even saying, since there's this one area in the south, mostly Louisiana, that wound up being warmer rather than cooler overall. And then Chicago, which was always on the very edge, annoyingly so, of the above normals, wound up being looks like 2 degrees above normal CDD wise over the course of the summer, which adds up. Chicago, big, always talked about in the winters. The big one of the big areas of HDD production, and I would imagine it's the same for CDD production, especially if it's above normal. So if nobody has anything else they want to add, can move on to our current forecast. Okay. If anyone wants to add anything, of course you can, so just let me know. Doing a quick look here, CFS, surprise, surprise, is our lowest forecast, with Joshua Herman and Persistence rounding out the top, as well as Dr. Roundy, expecting a warm verification due to the MJO. Seems to be that he is kind of indicating a similar pattern to what we've been seeing, just maybe the warmth shifted a little further to the east rather than being in the Montana, North Dakota area. Maybe it's more from Minnesota to New York would be my guess, based on his forecast, but he's not here. So I'll go first to get us started. So started off with a base value of 38.37 based on my 70% 10-year and 30% EC blend. Increased my value by 2.5 based on the CPC forecast, which has changed decently in the past week or two, and especially now. You can see a lot of above normal, 60% chance for almost the entire northern part of the country, with the entire northern part of the country seeing at least 50% chance of above normal, and the entire eastern seaboard is expected to be above normal, and that area of below normal, which was kind of keeping things in check a little bit, has been relegated to just Louisiana essentially, which doesn't really inspire a lot of confidence in any type of relief to all the heat in places like Chicago, New York, Philly, and Boston, the big drivers at this point, if they're quite above normal. So I increased by 2.5 based on that. And I also increased my value by 0.5 based on the NAO. I was looking at the teleconnections and the PNA and the AO. AO doesn't really do anything at this point, and PNA was around neutral, but the NAO seems to want to stay negative. So especially with the 14-day correlations, it seems that the verification is on the very bottom of the distribution. So with that, excluding an outlier, it looks like it'll probably be around -1 or 2 when we get to this period. So expecting a negative NAO. So I increased my value by a little bit based on that. And I also decreased my spread a little bit, just to kind of account, we're not really going to see too many wild swings. It could, of course, go outside this, but kind of expecting it to be within, probably between 50 and 35. Probably won't be any cooler than that. I don't see any reason for it to be cooler than that. But I've been wrong before, so we'll see. But I lowered my sigma just to kind of account for how consistently between the 30 and 10 year the verifications have been this year. Any questions, comments, complaints, concerns about my forecast? This is my forecast map as well, if anyone wanted to see that. A lot of warmth. A lot of warmth.
No complaints, Michael. Good take on that. I just have a question for you. Do you think there's an impact that potentially could arise from tropical activity? Is tropical activity worth considering at this stage? Like, how would you kind of handicap that?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be foolish to say I don't think there'll be any tropical activity in, September. As far as tropical activity goes, normally I don't think that, as far as in the above normal areas, I don't see tropical activity, at least in the northern tier, being too much of an issue. As far as in the south, though, it could be, Florida, the North Carolina to Georgia, and especially, of course, the Gulf as a whole. It could. Yeah, I think it was kind of factored in by the CPC fairly well as like a small area of below normal. So in terms of temperatures, I don't think it'll have too big of an impact, unless you end up with like a some type of Harvey situation where it just kind of rains for days in an area and gets stuck and has a long-term impact in this particular period. So overall, I don't think it'll have a big effect. It's possible. It's certainly a possibility that there'll be a tropical system. I don't think it'll have a too big of an effect on the overall number, though, if that makes sense.
I have a question about that,
Sure.
Dave. I guess this is for Dave, but this could be for anyone, I guess. You know, sorry. I guess, we talk, or at least I'm familiar quite a bit with, the impacts of Westpac, tropical Westpac activity and, on the North American jet stream pattern and this and that and the other thing. Not that the relationship is crystal clear, but that there's a lot of studies and work in terms of, looking at those interactions between the tropical West Pacific and North American jet stream pattern. Dave, what do you know, or anyone else on the line, like in terms of studies that have looked at the Atlantic, tropical activity and impacts on the North Atlantic, pattern, and or I guess you could also just talk about predictability in general. I guess those are a little bit two different questions. So I guess I am asking a little bit two different questions off the top of my head, but I guess they could be related. But have you seen stuff, or just based on your experiential, just experience, what do you know about the relationships between Atlantic tropical activity and North Atlantic patterns and or performance, i.e., do you see a significant, decrease in performance or increase or whatever when you see hurricanes, moving across the Atlantic?
Hey, Dave, was that for me?
That was for you, and anyone else is welcome to jump into.
I was off for a second. I had to take a quick phone call here on the desk. And I missed the back half of what kind of Michael was saying. I can jump in on the comment though, Dave. Do you need me? Want me to?
Yeah,
or
did you hear my question?
I did. I heard the kind of the tail end of that. So
it was just, it wasn't really so much related to Michael.
Yeah, right.
Michael inspired that question.
Sure. No, I bring it up because in our view here, like the tropics begin to play a larger role the further you go into the season. So you have a much larger impact potential in, say, September and October than you would have had in July and August. And there's a small maybe correlation to getting when large storms in the Atlantic supporting more of a North Atlantic ridge and kind of a pseudo-ish NAO look, negative NAO look. That can cause a lot of challenges as you go later into the season, right? You can reinforce the ridge on the East Coast. You can get it to retreat towards Eastern Canada and undercut that with a large trough. Like that was a classic what happened post Hurricane Sandy. So it's a little bit of an unknown. There you don't have a lot of sample size, right? You're going to get like a handful of these in a season, so you're not building up huge sample sizes either. And I bring up the tropics not to kind of pick apart what Michael was saying, but more to just highlight maybe some of the uncertainty and risk around what we're seeing. The other thing too, in mid-September, and this is not really as much related to the tropics, although it can be, but mid-September, you're also borderline getting, almost out of or very low numbers of CDDs in the north. So like Boston to Chicago has far fewer CDDs on average than you would have had, this week in August or, 3 weeks ago, right? The number of CDTs is starting to really deteriorate. So a really hot pattern in the north needs to stay and get exceptionally hot to start accumulating a lot. So you can erode a lot of CDDs in September if you can't get the south hot, right? That's where you're buoying your CDD total by southern cities. This is back to where we were, say, early to mid-May, when the north doesn't really contribute as much. So you have to be confident that you can kind of crank those northern cities consistently. It just becomes a challenge. So it's kind of a different it's an aside to the whole tropical thing. But we know we're going on, we're in an active period of the tropics, right? We get this, we had this view that we would go into an active period that, the convectively enhanced Kelvin wave is kind of sitting right over the Atlantic, and looks like it will into early to mid-September. It should set off, a number of storms. We're going to get one probably early next week in the Gulf. We should get another one around Labor Day. We're going to have one in the Central Atlantic this weekend. That'll be relatively harmless to land, but each of these is going to kind of shove around the pattern a little bit. My guess is by the time we get out to this week of the 8th, this target window, we'll probably be up 5 or 6 named storms from where we are today. So there's a lot that we'll have to kind of contend with to see how this forecast plays out.
But Dave, do you have any particular knowledge of have you seen studies or just whatever, even anecdotally, in terms of, in other words, let's just say the forecast performance question. I know probably the hypothesis is that, if there's, I don't know that everyone agrees with this, but one of the hypotheses might be if there's a lot of activity, forecast performance in terms of, let's say, national HDDs, or at least Eastern United States HDDs or CDDs, is going to go down. I think that's sort of a rule of thumb anyway, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen any studies though that sort of do back that up? That's, someone did and says, yes, when there's active, tropical Atlantic is very active, forecasts get crazy, and, CDDs, you should open up your spread and blah, blah, blah. Have you seen stuff like that?
No, I haven't seen studies on the Atlantic piece. Pacific's been looked at a little bit, and there's a direct correlation to some volatility with regards to Westpac activity. Now, Westpac's been really, really quiet this year, ultimately, in terms of both number of totals and also ACE. The Pacific will get you a little bit more well-behaved if you've got like a coherency towards the storms out there, right? You've got a consistent west-moving storms, you've got consistent recurving storms to enhance the Pacific jet towards long wave troughing over Eastern North America, right? Like you should have forecast skill degradation up until that point where you can kind of lock in with 1 or 2 storms that move in the same kind of pattern to reinforce the long wave kind of synoptic features around the globe. So the Atlantic, not so much. It's more anecdotal. It's more of like experiential, which is sort of like I've seen this a few times before. I think I have kind of a view on kind of what that should be doing. Pacific is a little bit more well studied.
Anyone else? Thanks, Dave. Anyone else have any or seen any research in terms of looking at the performance in, during high Atlantic activity or whatever, tropical activity? Just curious. It's funny, it's funny, Dave, isn't it? Like stuff like that, because you and I have been forecasting, for whatever years, and I know that thing has come up, that kind of question, probably since the days we started forecasting. And I'm sure there's got to be some studies, but it's interesting that, you and I aren't aware of something like that. It's just, it's like,
right.
it's frustrating.
I think the challenge too is, oftentimes when you get these active patterns, right, you've got to get multiple storms, right? Like, so take a snapshot of say where you were a week ago with regards to Henri and Fred, and then a tropical wave in the East Atlantic that hadn't been named, but now you're going to have this weekend, you'll have another storm in the Western Gulf, and you're going to have one near Bermuda or near Eastern Bermuda. Which one do you kind of coherently think is contributing to the pattern, right? So how do you like kind of pull that apart, right? So particularly when you've got like say 3 or 4 or 5 storms, like say you had summer like last year, which one is the impact to the overall pattern?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, it's funny when you start thinking about these research questions, they start simple and then you can easily complicate them. But even still, I always think with stuff like this, start simple. Like start as simple as possible, like 0 and 1. 0 meaning there's no active storms. What's the forecast performance the next 15 days? 1 meaning there's 1 or more active storms. And then again, look at the forecast performance the next 50 days. At least that gives you something. But then I agree with you. Right after you do that, the next question someone's going to ask, or the next, there's going to be 50 questions following. Well, what if there's 2 or more? What if there's 3 or more? What if there's 4 or more? What if there's a major hurricane? What if the proximity is right near New Jersey or New York versus if it's off the African coast? And those are all real good questions. I agree. Or what if, and then there's the muddled one, which is, well, what if there's no hurricane active and there's no active storm, but the models are predicting storms in the next 3 to 5 days. That's sort of the in-between scenario. So I agree. There's like lots of different contingencies or conditions that you would want to add after that. But I still think when you try to start from the highest level, and address some of those just very high level top tier questions first, and then kind of drill down, knowing that you're going to start sample size and things like that are going to start to, get a lot smaller. All right, I'm off my soapbox. Michael or whoever else, feel free to jump in.
I don't really have anything to add to that. But Dave, since you wanna share your forecast thoughts here?
Yeah, I don't sure. Since I'm on my soapbox. Yeah, so in terms of my subseasonal, I went with my standard formula that I've been using for the last few weeks. I did add a slight fudge factor, which I mentioned because it's subjective, a little bit like, hey, we still have this little bit of the MJO signal and sort of it's weaker, but it's kind of hanging more toward what historically had been some of the warmer side of things. And I also baked in a little bit of September and persistence. The fact that, obviously we're coming off warm forecast. I think the next 10 days in terms of the model forecast look pretty warm basis normal from a CDD. And then again, just September's in general, this is a little bit from memory, but have historically over the last 10, 15 years been very warm. So I used all of that to say, let me add a little bit of fudge factor here on that. But I feel like that's dangerous too, because I'm looking at Dr. Lupa, who's on the line now, and it wasn't that long ago where my fudge factor went far in the opposite direction. So, but that's my rationale.
Makes sense to me. Would anyone else like to go over their forecast?
Yeah, I'll quickly detail what we did. Actually, I made the forecast on the fly. We hadn't I hadn't talked to Joe much about it all weekend. I had noticed the ECMWF and some of the models were trending somewhere between the 30 and the 10-year means for the cooling degree days. But I also relied a little heavily on my La Nina analogs. And we're getting into the time of year now where the definition of what's an El Nino year, what's a La Nina year, of course, starts on October 1. And since we're projected to go into a La Nina year, I've been looking at what happens in the run-up to a La Nina in the fall, and also what happens when La Nina's fading from the previous year. And everything, when you look at the analogs from those two samples, most of those were in the upper 30s, actually in the lower to 30s, but upper 30s more recently. And so that accounts for our 37. But we also looked at the BSR quickly, the SOI. The CPC analogs are looking and to be in fair agreement with what some of the models are showing. So again, that accounts for our 37. That in September, as Dave was saying, you're beginning to really drop off in those CDDs. And if they're projecting warmth across the north, well, by mid-September is above normal enough to turn on the AC or use that cooling. So we kept it around 37.
Yeah, I'll just say I haven't had a September in the past 5 or 6, maybe even 7 years that hasn't been obliteratingly hot, at least through the first half of September here in Jersey, usually in the low 90s. So definitely AC worthy, at least in New Jersey. But
That would definitely be AC worthy.
The next few days, yeah. I mean, geez.
yeah, not something I look forward to every year, but
Hey, Michael, can I jump in for a quick sec?
yeah, sure.
Hey, not to embarrass anyone, but I think we may have a new forecaster on the line here too, Sarah. And I know we're almost out of time, so I just figured, Sarah, if you'd like to jump in, if you have any quick questions or just thoughts on the contest, this would be.
Dave, Sarah is one of mine. She's in my long range class, and I made them aware of the Tuesday briefings. So
yeah, I was a little late getting in here, but I definitely
I should warn you that you're going to get more of them.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, and don't hesitate now or in the future. Don't hesitate to interrupt and jump in and stuff like that. At the end of the day, this is really meant for you guys, for the students and stuff. And sometimes, as you can tell, we'll get on our soapbox and stuff because we find this interesting, all this stuff kind of fascinating, interesting too. But just kind of jump in, especially if we talk in weird lingo. I know sometimes we talk with certain teleconnections, certain acronyms and stuff that not everyone's familiar with, and we forget that. So please don't hesitate to say, jump in and say, "What the heck are you talking about? NAO, this, that, the other thing," and we can definitely slow down and explain everything.
Okay, I deeply appreciate that.
You got it. All right. Sorry, Michael, back over to you.
Yeah, I wasn't really gonna add anything profound. Just saying that seeing warm east via Bermuda High makes me very uncomfortable. Especially in September when it's down here by Philly, it's quite humid quite often, and I would like to have at least a little less humidity and certainly a little bit less heat. Would certainly help my AC bill as well. But would anyone else like to give their forecast in the last couple of minutes here?
I can squeeze mine in real quick since it's just the CPC forecast. We've already seen that it's pretty warm. There's still some cool there in the South Central, but it's much smaller than the warmth and lower probability. So I did go about 0.5 sigma above normal for this forecast. I don't think it's too far into September yet that some of that warmth won't actually materialize as CDDs. And a few more weeks in Northern Maine, well, there's no one there anyway, but Minneapolis maybe not contribute CDDs in a few more weeks. but I think they still do in mid-September. So I went above normal. Although not above the 10-year, I guess. I'm in between the 10-year moving average and the 10-year.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, I think that's everyone. Dave D'Arcangelo had to drop off, it looks like. Did he submit a forecast? Yeah, so looks like most people are between the 10 and 30 year for this period, except for Dave and Matt Rogers and myself and Dr. Roundy. So we got a decent distribution of between the 30 year and above the 30 year, but doesn't look like, yeah. So no one's below the 30 year, which is kind of a theme that we seem to have every week, that no one's really ever below the 30 year. So that trend continues. So unless somebody else has something they want to add, I think we can end a couple of minutes early here. Anyone have any last minute thoughts, comments?
I was just going to say, I can't help myself. You mentioned about no one being below the 30 year. And I guess that's true this week. But I feel like there's a lot of short-term memory there because, what I mean by that is the recent verification obviously was very hot and a lot of us underestimated it to some degree. But you don't have to go back too far. Like if you look at the most recent verification where we started this discussion, you will see that people were still below the 30 year, at least some people.
Yeah,
so you don't have to go too far back in time when there were people below the 30 year. And maybe that was because of, some of the things that were going on and, like we said, in forecasts that were made in late July and things like in early, August and such.
Yeah, I guess I was wrong about that one, but I always have short-term memory, it seems.
Not wrong, but the point like I was really trying to make is it seems like whether I don't know, again, I'm saying this subjectively because I don't know for a fact, but I think in general the forecasters, myself included, you get biased by the short-term verifications. It's hard not to. And so I think there's a tendency if the most recent verification verified hot, you tend to bump up a little bit the group as a whole, right? Not necessarily an individual forecaster, and vice versa. But again, just speculating a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely guilty of that. Plenty of times. So yeah, always something to look out for on a week-to-week basis. But
yep.
So unless anyone has any last second thoughts, we've hit the time here. So thanks everyone for coming, and
Yeah,
hope to see
David,
you all.
could you hang around for a few minutes after the recording?
Yeah, sure.
And I should have let you know that yesterday was our first day, and I sent out to the students the invitation for the Tuesday